Compounding sounds like a magic trick. People love to say, your money makes money, and then that money makes more money. It's one of those financial phrases you hear all the time, almost like a promise of effortless wealth. But the truth is, compounding doesn't feel powerful when you're just starting. It only begins to show its real weight once you already have a decent amount saved. That's why it looks like it works better for the rich, when in reality, the principle is the same for everyone. Take two people. One has $1,000 invested, and the other has $100,000. If both earn 10% in a year, the first person makes $100, while the second makes $10,000. The math is exactly the same. 10% is 10%, but the impact is completely different. For the person with $1,000, the gain feels small, almost invisible, barely enough to matter. For the one with $100,000, the gain is life-changing. It feels like money is growing on its own, like compounding is doing all the heavy lifting. This is the key difference. Compounding doesn't really show its strength in the beginning. It feels slow, frustrating, and sometimes pointless. But once you build a solid base, the results suddenly become obvious. This is why people say compounding favors the wealthy. They've already crossed the early stages where growth feels invisible, so now the numbers look impressive. But let's be clear. Compounding isn't magic. It doesn't pick sides. It works for anyone who gives it enough time and consistency. The challenge is surviving those early years when growth looks like nothing. That's when most people quit. Think about it. Imagine saving and investing for 3 years, putting aside $200 each month. At the end of those 3 years, you've invested $7,200. Let's say it grows to about $8,000. That's a gain of only $800 over 3 years. To many people, that feels like a waste of time. They start thinking, why bother? I've sacrificed, saved, and invested, and this is all I've got to show for it. This is the dangerous stage. The stage where compounding works, but it works in whispers. It's easy to give up when the numbers feel small, and most people do. They stop investing, they spend the money instead, and they never stay long enough to see compounding's real power. Now compare that with someone who pushes through. They keep investing for 10 years. Their monthly $200 contributions now total $24,000. But with compounding at work, the account could grow to around $38,000. That's $14,000 of growth. And suddenly the gains don't feel invisible anymore. Now imagine 20 years. That same person has invested $48,000, but their account could be worth more than $120,000. At this point, their money is working harder than they are. That's the turning point. The moment compounding switches from slow and boring to fast and undeniable. The wealthy just happen to be at this stage already. They either saved aggressively early on, or they invested consistently over decades, or sometimes both. Once their account passed $100,000, compounding stopped being a faint background effect and became the main driver of growth. That's why a wealthy person can see their money grow by $10,000, $20,000, or even $50,000 in a single year without lifting a finger. They're not doing anything special at that point. They're just letting time and math do their job. But here's the thing, everyone has the chance to get there. The real challenge is the gap between starting and reaching that first meaningful milestone. The gap between $1,000 and $100,000. This is where people lose patience. It's not that compounding doesn't work for them, it's that they don't work long enough for compounding. The wealthy understand this. They know the first stage of compounding is survival. Survive the boredom, survive the frustration, survive the doubt. Most people don't realize that investing $200 per month for 3 years isn't about making money. It's about training yourself to stay consistent. It's like planting a seed. You don't expect a tree in 3 days. You water it, you give it time, and eventually you're rewarded with shade and fruit. Here's another way to think about it. Imagine you're rolling a snowball down a hill. At the top, when the snowball is tiny, each roll doesn't seem to add much. You can roll it 5 times and barely see a difference. That's the early stage of compounding. But as the snowball grows, every roll adds more snow, and soon it's growing faster than you can keep track of. The hill hasn't changed. The snowball has. Compounding is the same way. The math is constant, but the effect grows with the size of your base. This is why building up your first $100,000 is often considered the hardest part of wealth building. Once you're past that, compounding starts carrying you forward. A 10% return on $10,000 is $1,000, but a 10% return on $100,000 is $10,000. At that point, compounding produces results big enough to cover expenses, reinvest, or save toward bigger goals. The wealthy didn't skip this stage, they went through it too. Some got there by saving aggressively, living below their means, and putting away large chunks of income early in life. Others got there by simply staying invested for decades, letting small contributions pile up until compounding finally clicked. Either way, they crossed the invisible line where compounding stops being a whisper and becomes a roar. So the real reason compounding works for the rich isn't because they're rich, it's because they've already survived the part that discourages most people. They stayed patient long enough for the math to tip in their favor. And here's what makes this even more encouraging. You can do the same. You don't need access to secret investments or special financial tools. It's easy to believe that the rich have some secret formula that makes compounding work for them. But the truth is, the only secret is time. They stayed invested long enough for the math to tip in their favor. They didn't panic at slow growth. They didn't stop when it felt boring. They let years of discipline do what daily motivation couldn't. Let's look at an example to make this concrete. Suppose two people each save $200 a month. The first person invests for only 10 years and then stops, leaving the money untouched. The second person waits 10 years to start, then invests $200 a month for the next 20 years. Who ends up with more? Surprisingly, the first person, who invested less money, could actually end up ahead. That's because the power of compounding comes not just from the amount you put in, but from how early you start. The years when nothing seems to happen are still building the foundation for the future. This is why financial educators emphasize starting young. The earlier you begin, the longer you give compounding to work for you. But even if you didn't start early, the principle is still the same. The key is to stay consistent, avoid interruptions, and keep your money working. The wealthy benefit from compounding not because the math is different for them, but because they've reached the stage where growth is obvious. Most people look at their progress too soon and get discouraged. They expect compounding to feel like a flood from the beginning, when in reality it starts as a drip. But over time, those drips fill the bucket, and then the bucket overflows. So the lesson is simple. If you're in the early stages, don't measure your progress only by how much you've gained so far. Measure it by how consistent you've been. Every dollar you put in is another worker that will earn money for you year after year. The first $10,000 might feel like the hardest, and the next $10,000 might feel only slightly easier. But as your base grows, each gain adds up faster than the last. Before long, you'll look back and realize that what once felt slow has become unstoppable. The wealthy didn't skip this stage. They struggled through it too. The difference is they didn't stop. They kept going until compounding switched from a whisper to a roar. You can do the same. Of course, not everyone can save at that level, and that's okay. What matters is consistency. Even small amounts grow surprisingly large when given decades. Someone who saves $100 a month for 40 years could still end up with more than $300,000 with average returns. The key isn't to compare yourself to someone with $100,000 already invested. The key is to recognize that the math is on your side too, as long as you don't quit. So, the real reason compounding seems to work better for the rich isn't because they have access to some secret formula. It's because they've already crossed the invisible line where compounding shifts from being background noise to being the main driver of wealth. Anyone can cross that line. It just takes patience, steady contributions, and the discipline to let time do its job. Compounding isn't magic, but it might be the closest thing to it in finance. The only price you pay is patience, and that's why it feels like it rewards the rich. They've already waited long enough. If you can do the same, your results will eventually look just as powerful.